Ready to kick off the afternoon portion of the programming. It is my great privilege to introduce our next presentation. Modern Warrior Live is an autobiographical musical drama detailing a soldier's life in the military and a subsequent transition home. It leads to a heightened awareness of the psychological weight of war and the challenges that veterans face when reintegrated back into civilian life. The overall project has three main objectives: to promote dialogue and build bridges between veterans and civilians through live performances, collaborative workshops, and other discussions in community settings; to combat social stigma related to post-traumatic stress; and to support and inspire veterans on their pathways to recovery and post-traumatic growth. It is written and narrated by Staff Sergeant and co-creator James Poland. James grew up in Warren, Ohio, and enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 17. He was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as an infantryman. During his 8 years with the division, he spent 36 months fighting in Afghanistan across 3 separate tours as a machine gunner and squad leader. James's story is complemented with dynamic musical performances spanning diverse genres by a cast of world-class artists under the direction of a renowned jazz trumpeter, jazz educator, and Modern Warrior Live co-creator, Dominic Farinacci. Dominic from Solon, Ohio, is a Mac Avenue recording artist, was appointed as the inaugural Global Ambassador to Jazz at Lincoln Center by Wynton Marsalis, has been a TED speaker, and regularly tours all around the world. You can read more about Dominic and James and Modern Warrior Live online at modernwarriorlive.org, as well as on the Facebook and Instagram pages. You'll learn more about James throughout the performance, and you'll have a chance to learn more about both Dominic and James in a panel following the performance as well. I learned about Modern Warrior Live early in 2017 after it was already under development, and when I read about what it was, given my career focus in the trauma field and also my personal love of jazz, I just had to reach out, and I'm really glad I did. It led to conversations with Dominic and James, and to me becoming involved as a kind of an advisor and liaison to the healthcare and health education communities. The full version of this show is about 90 minutes long. It's been performed in theaters at Playhouse Square, in New York City, and around the country. You'll be experiencing a modified version that has been performed at professional conferences like this one and other non-theatrical settings. But without further ado, we present to you Modern Warrior Live.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pomer, for having us. Just a quick note, so just for those of you who are right in front of the speaker, it should be okay, but if you feel compelled to move, especially when the volume creeps up a bit, just feel free. So I think the balance should be okay. Just a forewarning, we won't be offended. The speakers are kind of up front, so thank you very much. Great.
We are warriors, and the desire to prove ourselves in combat's as timeless as the combat itself. We feel connected to the Zonde warrior of Africa, the Persian immortal, the Apache, and the Viking. And like the Viking, we miss our brothers in Valhalla, where the warrior lives forever. I remember discussing with the men why we fight. More specifically, why after a certain point in a certain number of fights have we decided to stay and keep fighting. We're as similar as we are different. We look and sound different. And we come from much further than just the boundaries of the United States. But we're the same. We're assertive, we're stubborn, and we're loyal to one another. We see ourselves in our brothers as we see ourselves in our enemies. For us, fighting is very much a choice. We aren't victims of our socioeconomic disadvantage or seeking society's validation. We understand that both combat and society have changed. We fight, we feel loss, we return home, we grow, and we lead new men and women in this modern world as modern warriors. the Army less than a month after my 17th birthday. My first stop is Fort Benning, Georgia, where after having my head shaved and getting my uniforms issued, I have my first personal interaction with the drill sergeant. And he turns and looks down at me, and in an uncharacteristically friendly voice, he asks me if I have a girlfriend. He then quickly tells me to shut the fuck up and proceeds to paint a violent and vulgar picture of him and her together. I spend the next 14 weeks with the men next to me, and we fall into a rotation between leaning on and pushing one another. And once we learn to work together, it becomes easy. For the most part, the individuals that can't find their way into our tribe find their way out of the unit, and the ones on the fringe fight to improve their positions. The pressure that we put on one another is more than the training itself applies, because at the end of the day, we can all recognize that we're marching towards war. But as I listen to the lyrics of this particular one, and I think of the men marching on all sides of me, I can't help but wonder which of us aren't coming back. I'm sitting on the front porch with my dad in preparation for my first deployment, and we're discussing the allocation of my life insurance policy and how I wanted to cover college for my little brother. And then he gets a little more choked up, and he asks what I would want done with my body. It seems like such a cruel conversation to have with a parent. But thinking funerals are for the living, I tell him what I think would help them most. A hometown burial in a suit with military honors. And then the day comes to finally leave, and turning my back on him is the hardest part, so instead, I just keep backing up. Maybe it's because I can't look away from my dad's eyes. I haven't seen him cry since I was 6. Since then, we've relied on each other. Watching my family console one another, I'm sad to see him cry again. and then I leave. The learning curve is steep. And through my night vision, I see something that looks like a fuse being lit, and my squad leader jumps behind my equipment. A second later, something flies past my head and sticks in the ground. It's the first time I was ever shot at with a rocket-propelled grenade, and I'm mostly just irritated I hadn't recognized what was happening. Luckily, though, by the time I'm needed, I'm more than proficient. Before flying into a hostile city, we prepare thoroughly. We map out exactly where we're landing, how we're attacking each building, and we discuss our rules for lethal engagement. But once I prepare my weapons, explosives, and other equipment, I have some time to myself. I know that the safety of my guys is in my hands, and that my safety is in theirs. So I put my headphones in, block the thoughts of family and home, and listen to others who are fighting. This puts me in an introspective place and allows me to take on a character, as I prepare myself to be calculated, unforgiving, and uncompromisingly violent. I fly in carrying the M240 Bravo. The M240 Bravo is a 49-inch, 27.6-pound, 7.62mm belt-fed, air-cooled, fully automatic machine gun fired from the full position. It's capable of firing 650 to 950 rounds a minute and has a maximum effective range of 1,100 meters on tripod. It's my gun. And in a lot of ways, it's my identity. There's a comfort in the clarity of our shared purpose, and it's never let me down. After a long walk into the city, I'm changing my socks when my friend yells down from the roof that he sees a bunch of guys carrying backpacks. A moment later, he says, "Never mind, they're bags of rocket-propelled grenades," and within moments, that mud rooftop begins getting chewed down by a hail of automatic gunfire. I grab the other machine gun and go to move out as I hear one of our leaders say, "We're surrounded, and air support's 45 minutes out, so hold this building." My friend runs by me screaming, "It's the fucking Alamo," and it makes me laugh as I settle into my position on this corner alley. And now I'm lying here ready to keep anyone from getting to my guys. They're busy fighting in every direction, and it's my job to keep the enemy from reinforcing itself. There's a 3-foot wall to my left, and a mud building to my right, and as the rounds hit above my head, a dust cloud settles on my position and slightly chokes off each breath. There's an enemy fighter coming to meet me in this alley. I know he's coming here, because that's what I would do if I was him. I come to the corner of that 3-foot wall, point my AK-47 down and spray his position. So I decide I'm going to shoot his weapon. He'll be about 50 feet away, and I think I can realistically cover that 3-foot wall before he can get me. It's weird how calm I feel. Everything just kind of makes sense. I don't even feel scared, but I'm also not convinced I'm living through the moment. And then my enemy does the unexpected. He stands up and sprints. And for a moment, I'm completely caught off guard. I squeeze the trigger and I throw my shoulder into my gun, and I get lucky. He's thrown back as he falls behind the building he was running to, and a second later, his feet are pulled from sight. With a new confidence. I speak a little louder in every conversation. I feel better somehow. And I know I found what I was meant to do, so I re-enlisted for 6 years. The re-enlistment isn't completely guilt-free, though. My little brother was 12 when I left, and I can't help but feel like I've let him down. Between the fights, I think about the moments where I got lucky, how they could have gone differently. And I remember seeing Nick Berg get beheaded online. It forces me to consider the possibility of my own capture. I know I could never let my little brother see a video of my execution, but I also don't know that I could actually kill myself. So, I write his name on a single 9mm bullet, and I place it in my sleeve pocket. So just in case I ever completely run out of ammo, and I can't fight my way back to my guys, I can take out that same bullet and think about how he'll remember me. And then I'll make sure no one sees me suffer. Between my friend Troy and I, our machine guns are a force to be reckoned with in the fight, and we take on their identity. In one particular firefight, he's on a rooftop behind mine, and he can't shoot back, so he cheers me on as I attempt to locate and kill the individual shooting at our team. I get an award for this mission for killing up to 10 people as an achievement. At this point in my life, people ask me what it feels like to kill someone, and I ask them what it feels like to make a grilled cheese, and that sounds cold, and I guess I like that. But my point is more that your environment shapes how you internalize the experience, and often individual thought's not given to processing that specific event. Plus, a lot of times killing someone's a collective effort, and a lot of people are shot behind bushes and trees. What does it feel like to shoot a bush or a tree? I would argue it feels like any other job, but with recoil. I'd grown up in a Christian household, spending many summers at church camp. And at 12, I couldn't wait to call my dad and tell him I wanted to be baptized. I maintained this relationship with my church until I shipped out at 17. People often say that war reinforces their faith, or that it provides them some spiritual experience, but that wasn't the case for me. I couldn't find the divine intervention in the lifelessness of the bodies and the limbs around me. I remember before I deployed, though, I'd asked my church what their opinion would be of me if I had to kill someone. And they told me that they believed if it was in self-defense, that God would understand.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Ooh, his truth is marching. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
through my second deployment, as I reach a point that I don't even feel adrenaline in firefights anymore. I don't think I'm capable of feeling anything until Seth dies. He's the one that welcomed me to the unit, taught me how to use my machine gun, slept across from me, and on his last deployment we became close. I keep it together for the first couple days after his death, but when my best friend catches me away from our guys and gives me a hug, I can't help but break down. He physically holds me up as my legs give out, and just as I start to get it together, he begins to break down. And I get my shoulder under his and I hold his weight. So that's what we do. We hold each other's weight. A moment later, we wipe our faces, put back on our masks of composure, and we step back out in front of the men we're leading. Shortly after, while tensions are still high, we capture a young enemy fighter. And as I approach him, he asks if I'm going to cut his head off. I can't help but laugh and tell him no one's going to hurt him. And when I smoke a cigarette, he asks for one. He can't use his hands, so I let him smoke it for mine. We see ourselves in our brothers, as we see ourselves in our enemies. For a moment, I can see myself in him. I can feel this sense of humanity developing, but at the same time, I wouldn't hesitate to stab him in the neck if it was necessary to protect my guys. I start seeing the consequences of my actions in my personal life. Romantically, 4 years of my emotional unavailability and general apathy has left my girlfriend questioning our relationship when she leaves me. I start to have a hard time concentrating on the mission, as I begin to recognize that personally, I can't become the type of husband and father that I hope to one day be, and maintain the fighter that I've chosen to become. So after sitting down and analyzing what's in my sphere of control and what I can hopefully influence, I decide that I'm going to leave the military. It doesn't take long for things to start to feel a little more optimistic. For the first time, I start to wonder what I'm going to do with my life, now that I can imagine growing older.
Now I heard there was a secret chord that David played, and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. The baffled king composing hallelujah. Your faith was strong, yet you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to her kitchen chair, she broke your throne and cut your hair, and from your lips she drew You say I took the name in vain, but I don't even know the name. But if I did, really, what's it to you? There's a blaze of light in every word. It doesn't matter which you've heard. And it's not a cry that you hear at night. It's not someone who's seen the light. It's a cold, it's a broken hallelujah. 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 I did my best. It wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I've told the truth, I didn't come to fool you. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Back in the States, it doesn't take me long to reach a point where I miss the fighting, and I feel like less without it. Luckily, when I close my eyes and I think about the details of the fights, the adrenaline comes back and I feel alive again. One night, I go for a walk near my dad's house, and a light flight helicopter flies overhead. And immediately, my heart starts racing, and my hands start shaking as I feel everything that I feel when I'm in a helicopter being loaded into a firefight as tracers are flying by, but now, I'm just on a residential street in Ohio, with my hands on my knees, as I fight to catch my breath. I spend the next 4 hours chain smoking Newports as I try to figure out what the fuck just happened. excuse for a confrontation. And it seems that no matter how irrational we are, there's always one person that keeps us from making a big mistake. One night, after being provoked by an individual calling me sir, I casually placed my hands behind my back and I let my watch fall into my pocket so it won't cut me when I hit him. And one of my friends sees this, recognizes someone's recording me on a cell phone and pulls me back. By working together, we protect one another, even from ourselves. I buy a new sports car and I start driving through places where I'll stand out, places people tell me not to go. One night, as I'm pulling out of a plaza, a prostitute approaches the driver's side of my car as a dealer tries to sell me coke through the passenger window. And though I appreciate neither of them care about the loaded Glock on my console, I decline their offers. But I know that the three of us understand violence. It makes me feel closer to myself in their world. the afternoon, I have 3 missed text messages. The first is from my mom, and the other 2 are from a girl that I just met, but before getting to know her, I'm bored. Or I don't have the energy or desire to let her in. If I did, I'd just hurt her in the long run, so I'll distance myself now. Maybe this is what my mom means when she says she doesn't like the way I treat women. As I roll my feet off the bed, I can recognize that my head hurts from the alcohol-induced dehydration, but I've grown to accept it as a normal feeling, and I justify it with the random military achievements scattered around my apartment. Am I crazy? Society determines what crazy is, right? And what does society know about the real world? I mean, I guess they know I'm crazy.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions let it echo in so much space. And when you're out there without care, yeah, I was out of touch, but it wasn't because I didn't know enough. No, I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
My toothbrush looks disgusting when I pick it up. Let my thoughts go where they want. It's the first time I've stopped since I was 17, and I don't know whether to grieve or feel hopeless, whether to be angry or psychoanalyze myself, so I just start with trying to remember who I was. Remembering a time when men followed me. Remembering a time that I felt better.
And I hope that you are having the time of your life. Oh, but what do you think's wise? That's my only advice. Oh, come on now. Who do you think you are? Bless your soul. If you think you're really in control, well, maybe you're crazy. Maybe you're crazy. Maybe you're
I hear my phone ringing and I'll see who it was later. I step in the shower and the heat from the water reminds me that I'm only physically here. Mentally, I'm with those I live for. My mind quickly bounces between not just the friends that I've lost, but their widows and their children, and I can't help but picture each one individually as they flash through my thoughts like some fucked up slideshow. I wish I could trade places with any of them. I try to prevent what's about to happen. I tell myself, I'm the tough guy by their lives, with my decisions, in my hands, and no matter what I tell myself, I can't stop it. And I feel my bottom lip curl like I'm a child, and I sit down in the shower shaking. My phone starts ringing again. understand, they'd either think I'm crazy or they'd feel sorry for me. And I don't want either.
Just like me.
But at the same time, if our view of the veterans is one of disease orientation, of post-traumatic stress syndrome, of disorder, if you assume that there's something wrong with people, if you do it long enough, expectations are very strong. There's also something called post-traumatic growth, where you come out of a situation like that and you actually feel kinder toward your fellow man, fellow woman, that you are actually a better husband, father. You actually have a closer relationship with your God. You do not have to go around apologizing if there's some rage in you. Although if we tell our veterans enough that this is what's wrong with them, they may actually start believing it. I would just say there's one misperception of our veterans, and that is they are somehow damaged goods. I don't buy it, and I think that that kind of self-pity, while victimhood in America is exalted, I don't think our veterans should join those ranks.
Sharing my past wouldn't be a big deal if it didn't change how people viewed me at a time when I'm still trying to figure out how I view myself. Even in my own head, the negative stigmas could blur my self-perception. I know if I left it to others, I would be damaged. I'd be sedated. I'd be another object of sadness for that general PTSD narrative, and the worst part would be the social acceptability of it all. Slowly, over months, I start to organize my thoughts. I begin to recognize the time I've spent processing my past has left me feeling healthier. I'm happier, but I still don't feel very capable. I meet an amazing young woman, and for her I try to find the right balance of confidence and empathy, of action and introspection. I try and blend the best parts of who I was with the best parts of who I can be. I sign up for 2 classes, afraid I might not be able to handle a third. And almost immediately I reconnect with the ambition I remember having in the military. My first writing assignment's a memoir, and because of it I become the guest speaker for Veterans Day. Those around me encourage me to find greater challenges, as I begin to recognize that the lessons I've learned in the military are now leading to my personal growth. The other day, my mom asked me how I found peace. Maybe I found it in wanting to share it. I know if I could give anything to the ones that are hurting, it would be peace. I know that there's some individuals that feel as though they cannot relate and might see me as an exception. And I know that for others, things might not get better. But I can't help but think that there's individuals out there that need to know growth is possible. They need to know that society can be wrong when it assigns labels to survivors based on the trauma we survive. Why is it the case someone that survives cancer is considered stronger, while someone that survives combat is considered damaged or a liability? Forged in combat's a saying we rarely hear now. Why? We don't feel like victims. I'm not saying that road's always easy. It's littered with overdoses and suicides. And each time that dull pain that comforts me is transformed into a searing pain. And that feeling leaves me once again looking forward to just the familiar ache of loss. But I know that I'd do it all again. Most of us would. Because those struggles have shaped who we are. I'm grateful to be here sharing some of my memories. I say some of my memories because I can't share everything. I can't tell you what it's like to open a closed casket and polish your friend's uniform, knowing that you'll be the last one to see him. Or what it's like to look a 3-year-old in the eye and try and explain to him who his father was. Or how my friends have sacrificed their lives to protect the men and women next to them. To clarify, it's not that I can't share these memories because it would be too hard, although that's also true. But I can't share these memories because even though they weigh most heavily on me, they're not solely mine to share. They belong to the lost one's friends and families, and for that reason I can only share them with those closest to me. When I share them, I share part of myself. I become vulnerable. But I find a new toughness in this vulnerability, and for the first time in a long time, I feel as though I'm once again becoming part of something bigger than myself, something timeless and uncompromising. Until Valhalla.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to quickly introduce you to these wonderfully inspiring musicians. On piano, holding it down here, this is wonderful Joe Hunter. He's certainly one of the important music icons and staples of our Cleveland community for the past few decades. He's been my mentor and so many others mentors over the past few years. So thank you, Joe, for joining us. And through Modern Warrior Live, you know, the educational process is really important on every level. I'm heavily involved in music education. And so on bass and drums, we have these wonderfully young, talented musicians who are actually from, on drums, from Cleveland School of the Arts. He's in 11th grade, and this is Gabe Jones on drums. And the veteran of the group here, who was in 12th grade, big time, on his way on leaving high school, from Westlake High School, this is Graham Guerin on bass. I think it's important to involve younger generation of musicians inside a project like this, because for all of us, it's quite educational, you know, to hear James's story and to really internalize it through the music, through the arts. Wonderful vocalist, also wonderful iconic vocalist here in our generation from the Cleveland area. We're so glad when he joins us. This is Mr. Will Blaze. He's actually back in the kitchen. And I think probably who he's talking with is wonderful vocalist we've been working with over the past years. We met on the other side of the world when I was living in Doha, Qatar, brought her out there from New York City, and she's been in New York ever since. Chanel Johns. All right, Chanel. And there's Will. How about another round of applause for the inspired Mr. James Coley here.
Thank you. And Dominic Farinacci, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
Thanks. I think we're looking to transition to a Q&A now. Do you want to bring the table out? We got 3 songs.
You want this one?
Yeah, we're probably in here.
Who's running sound. This is Mr. Kent Dawkins here, our sound design, by the way. And running multimedia, Javier Davis back there.
Check. Once again, thank you, Modern Warrior Live. Weren't they great? It was amazing. I've experienced the show probably more than anyone other than the castmates and Dominic's dad, who's right here too. Other than them, I've probably seen it more than anyone else, and it never gets old. And I'm just really thrilled that we're able to bring them here today. For the rest of this session, we're going to have kind of a Q&A, a panel discussion. I want to keep it pretty flexible because I want to have all of you have an opportunity to ask questions or interact with James and Dominic. I do have some prepared questions to have people comment on, but I wanted to start with just giving Dominic and James each a few minutes to just say whatever they'd like to say about the Modern Warrior Live project. And I'm going to also ask a couple of questions to Tom Saul about his thoughts about the performance and the project. And hopefully you all will have a chance to ask some questions too. So I'll turn it over to, who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Dominic will go first.
Great. So anything we want to discuss? Politics, religion, just kind of generally speaking, is that right? When we originally started out creating this, we didn't really know what it was going to happen, what was going to happen. Over the past years before this project, I've been involved in a lot of, passionate about a lot of different projects in bringing arts and important social causes together. And using the platform as artists, you know, I get to travel all over the world and meet people of all different cultures and present music to them. So how can we use that platform we have to really have people walk out of the room better informed and passionate and about something, about a cause, a movement to help heighten awareness. So the arts for us is a real perfect platform. I just want to mention that when we first started building the show, we said, okay, well, let's, you know, maybe we'll do this in all performing arts centers around the country. And while we might get there, and we've done quite a few, we quickly found out that, especially after meeting Dr. Palmieri, and he kind of broke down what was actually going down here in specific terms, in terms of James talking about his experience. We found a great interest actually from a lot of different mental health conventions. So I think 80% of the work we've done about 65 shows so far since we started 2 years ago around the country. And most of the work we've done have been in mental health conventions and veteran gatherings and galas, and a handful of performing arts centers and schools as well. So we're kind of just getting started in a big way. We have, you know, really big plans in terms of integrating this in all different places around the country, and we intentionally built all different kinds of scalable shows to be able to fit in a room like this that has literally nothing, and then we have to bring everything, into a living room that we've done a performance for 14 folks in Easton, Maryland as part of a fundraiser, all the way up to performing arts centers and a conference center for 5,000 people that we did last year at the National Council for Behavioral Health in DC. So that's really the intent of designing all of these different models so that it can be flexible and live in all different kinds of environments and ultimately to reach people of all different walks of life.
Yeah, in the health arena. You know, I know for me, it's also something that I never thought I would be doing. I mean, obviously, as an infantry guy, I got out and I started going to school, getting a finance degree. And, you know, the video you saw in this show here with all the veterans, the first time we worked through any portion of a script and we were still trying to figure out what this would be, and you know, if we wanted to fully develop this, what that might look like, all those veterans you saw there came to a workshop, one of our first workshops, and it was the first time I'd ever read through what I wrote with Chanel, the female vocalist you saw tonight, in the band, and I think I got about 5 minutes in before I saw the reaction that we had 2 World War II veterans sitting like 5 feet in front of me, and I saw their reaction, and then I started seeing the reaction from other vets. And immediately this became a passion project for us. And so thanks for having us here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you. Maybe I'll start with a question for Dominic. I know, because we've talked before, that Dominic didn't serve in the military. So as a civilian, can you share what your general perceptions maybe were historically about veterans or combat and military, and how those perceptions perhaps have evolved as you got to know James and worked with him and worked on the show?
That's an excellent question. I think that was why I was so passionate about developing this, what became Modern Warrior Live. I was working on my last album that was recorded in Cleveland. It's called Short Stories, and producer introduced me to this song by Tom Waits called Soldier's Things from a 1983 album called Swordfish Trombones. And lyrically, it's about a soldier coming back from war and trying to readjust to civilian life. Even though I'm all right, thanks, guys. Great, show's over. So lyrically, it's about that. Of course, I'm an instrumentalist. I don't sing, but I try to internalize lyrics, and so I can, you know, put them out through my horn. That's my way of singing. And so it was kind of on a journey of trying to learn more about this world that I never thought about, that I got to meet James through a mutual friend in Cleveland. And so when I met James, I instantly realized that, first of all, I didn't really think about, you know, veteran transition at all, you know, before I heard the song, before I met James. And so I quickly realized that my perception of veterans coming back was kind of limited to the snapshot sound bites that we hear in the media, right? And as James talks about the different, you know, buckets of the hero, the damaged veteran, and when I'm hearing about James and getting to meet a lot of the buddies that he served with is a story that I frankly don't really hear about in the media. It's about a story about, tremendous, having a tremendous responsibility at such a young age, and how do you overcome adversity, and how do you grow from that, right? That's what we don't really hear about. So that snapshot that I was here, and I said, well, how can we kind of put this into a context where we can get outside of our own echo chamber of talking about this, and we can really reach people that, like myself, who I think, would get great value in hearing it, and to really kind of normalize that perception. The last thing I'll mention is that a lot of times, what I noticed about anytime a lot of times civilians are the perception of veterans is kind of wrapped around a very thick kind of patriotic thing that is kind of hard to kind of get through and to kind of get to the core of the story and the human condition, right? So this show really intentionally kind of takes out all other elements and gets right to the core of the story, and so that's what kind of motivated me to really put this production on.
And James, can you share a little bit about the process of writing, including the kind of the back and forth of the writing and the music and kind of the co-creation with Dominic?
Yeah. So while I was in the military, I think I wrote something one time, kind of just in response. My cousin had written something. He was in the Marines and he was overseas as well. And after we lost one of the guys in the unit, I wrote something real short, and then never really wrote anything again. I didn't really see myself as a writer or anything like that. It really took all the way up until me sitting down in an English class at a community college after the military, and the first assignment was a memoir. My English professor said, "Hey, can you write me a 3-page memoir?" I think it was double-spaced. So I went and I told her, "Hey, I'm probably going to blow this length requirement out of the water, but I'll try and give you something honest. I just want to let you know I'm okay, like before I submit this to you." And so I did. I turned this memoir in, and then she said, "Hey, I really just want to show some people." And I found that there were certain veterans relating to what I was saying there. So from that, I mentioned in the show, I was asked to be the guest speaker. I was at Cuyahoga Community College. I was asked to be their guest speaker for Veterans Day after that. And then John Carroll asked me to sit on a panel. And so I found myself in that space a little bit more, just sharing my experience. So that's about the time frame Dominic and I met. So when it came time to actually write the show, I still hadn't written anything other than that memoir. And I was getting back to a really good place, or at least I was in a better place. And so it took effort to go back and try and put myself back in kind of that, I guess that rougher frame of mind in order to try and write from that perspective. So I think I wrote most of it over the course of a month and a half, while drinking at like 4 a.m. and just kind of dumping things out. And then obviously, came out of it, went back, and started editing, and just that process on its own was therapeutic. But the part that was really interesting and different this time in working with Dominic is as I would write those chunks and I would kick things to him, he would create music that would reflect what I said. And sometimes that music would come back, and a lot of times it would be right on, and sometimes it wouldn't feel right. It would sit with the emotion of that piece for me. And so it would force me to go back and look at what I wrote, and sometimes it would force me to go back and re-examine how I internalized experiences and how I'm viewing them, retrospectively, I guess. And sometimes, there was growth just in that process and having to work through how I really felt about pieces just so the music could be accurate. Obviously, the whole creation of that was amazingly therapeutic, and the show continues to be therapeutic. One of the things that I'm noticing now, the more we do the show, is the parts that aren't in the show have kind of become blind spots of mine. So I have to circle back to them and make sure I'm touching on them, just for that maintenance.
Thank you. I wanted to give Tom Saul a chance to to comment if you'd like, Tom. You know, I thought it would be interesting to get your perspective on this because you're a writer, James is a writer, so comment on kind of on your take on the process, but also you know, one of the messages that Modern Warrior Live puts out there is kind of, you hear it in the show, and I've heard you guys talk about it, kind of the universality of the message. It's not just about you know, veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. It applies to veterans of all eras. It applies to veterans from other countries. As a Vietnam veteran and as a writer, Tom, do you have any comments that you'd like to share about the project or anything related to it?
I thought the performance was wonderful, and had, as a fellow combat veteran, thank you for your service too. And no problems at all relating. Maybe I need to. I was writing while you guys were doing your thing. Crying with my mom and dad. The day I left for Vietnam, we went to the Catholic Church out in Suffield, and my mom was just bawling throughout the entire church service, and neither of my parents went with me to the airport. My mom was, I wrote a poem to my parents, apologizing to them for the pain that I caused them by signing up for the Marine Corps. It just set my poor dad back on his heels. Faith. I lost everything. When I came back, when I got out of the Marine Corps in May of 1970 and returned to Kent State just after the shootings, and my brother was a guardsman on campus that weekend, but the first class I took, I was called out for being a veteran and shut down immediately. And that was early June. By September, I was my first stint at Rexville. And during the 2 weeks that I was there, Vietnam was never mentioned. So the difference between how veterans were treated, and it wasn't just Vietnam, I think that the war in Iraq and Afghanistan has brought an awareness to the country about trauma, which had never been done before. The mask of composure, the numbness that is just, you can't function unless you're numb. You know? Helicopters. What can we say? Any time one goes by. And finally, relationships too. I have a lot of trouble with relationships, but it was interesting that when I was teaching and there would be a fight at school, I would run to that fight to break it up. And the principal told me one day, she said, "You know what? I think you like that stuff." And I took it really personally. How could she say such a thing? But I think she was right.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, so thank you for reminding me of everything.
Thank you. And thank you for your service, and obviously thanks for everything. Just out of curiosity, do we have how many veterans do we have in the room?
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I just wanted to say real quick on the Vietnam note. You know, I always want to take a moment to thank Vietnam vets too for everything they did to create an environment where something like this could even exist. You know, I mean, obviously I know the treatment Vietnam vets when they got home was very different than than what I had because of that. So, so thanks for creating an environment that would allow something like this to exist.
Sorry, question? Comment?
I wonder, do you notice any difference in the reaction?
Yeah, as far as, you asked if I noticed any difference in the reaction as far as like that helicopter reaction I mentioned?
Well, not so much that, but the people who served in the Vietnam era, many of them were not volunteers.
Right.
And whether or not in your performances, do you notice anything, or has that come up in terms of, I mean, people were treated differently, absolutely, but people were there involuntarily experiencing similar traumatic experiences. Just wondering if that had come, or if you noticed anything in that regard.
Yeah, so that has been a discussion after a lot of our shows. You know, it's one of those, I think, you know, because the show is written specifically about my experiences, we try to be as universal as possible, but naturally, you know, we do have some blind spots, and I think that that's one of them. I think that there's obviously relatable experiences for everyone there, but yeah, as far as, you know, I wrote this very much from the mentality of not only the individuals that joined that wanted to go fight, but I was thinking specifically the whole time making this about like my friends that I went, we fought together, came back, and we were like, hey, let's go do that again. And that, you know, just wanting to stay in that environment. And so that's kind of the direction I approached the show from. But yeah, we have had that conversation, and unfortunately it's one of those things that I have a hard time speaking to, that experience. But, you know, try our best to make sure that we're mentioning it so people can be aware of it. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, not at all. I just wondered about it.
Else? Matt, do you want to come up and use the mic?
Hello, gentlemen. Matthew Slater, Valley Home. Met you guys about 2 years ago, I think. It was at SUMA. You guys performed. Wonderful. Thank you. So I work with homeless vets. I'm a civilian through and through. And I love that we have both a civilian and a veteran working together. When I got into the work with veterans, you know, we heard a lot about vets helping vets, which is important. But I also feel like there's such an important piece that's missing with vets and civilians working together. And I'm just curious, what I feel like sometimes is missing is understanding the true costs of war. And on the civilian side, for us understanding that, I feel like we do a tremendous job of training our troops, and then they come back and we say, be a civilian. And so I'm just curious, as civilians and sometimes civilians working with veterans, is there something that you hope we as civilians get out of that? Is there something that, can you expound more upon what you learned in this experience?
Yeah, so I think sorry, just to be sure, so your question was, you know, if, what do I hope civilians get out of the experience?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah. So, you know, I think one of the biggest issues that I know I faced coming out, right, I don't necessarily come from a military family, was this sense of isolation, right? I mentioned in the show you know, that I would quickly become the sum of whatever I would tell somebody. Somebody here, you know, I was in the military from 17 to 26, so I got out to Cleveland at 26, 27. And so not only had I spent my adult life outside of the civilian world, but I spent it in this violent world of, you know, being in an infantry unit, constantly deploying. So, you know, naturally, people wanted, as I got to know people, they wanted to know about me, and all my experiences were things that if I shared them kind of isolated me in that friendship. And so really what I was left kind of sorting through on my own was this sense of isolation. And so in making the show, we tried our best to root everything in the human experience, right? So as I'm talking about deploying, I'm talking about seeing my dad cry. talking about those things. And that's something that I think everybody can relate to, you know. And so if we make an effort to try and frame everything in a relatable experience as much as possible, that it's our hope we can kind of create some sense of a level playing field as much as we can, or some base of understanding from which to have conversations to try and combat that isolation, to try and have a starting point for conversations between civilians and veterans. You know, I know a lot of times we see veterans after seeing the show, in talking to civilians, in conversations that we're lucky enough to be a part of, them saying, hey, well, in the show, you know how he said this, well, here's how mine was different. And so there's that framework to build on. I think it just kind of, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, but to help combat the isolation and build that support system, at least in the audience after the show.
And you had asked me on the civilian side. Just briefly. Let's see. So, well, one important thing for this production is to be exactly what James wants it to be. I mean, we have a lot of supporters who helped to build the show, and we had a lot of folks who came and said, we'll give you a lot of money if it fulfills this type of agenda. And we turned a lot of folks down, and we kind of drew red lines, one specific red line, even at the beginning of the production. And in terms of James always having the final say on exactly what you see up here. Maybe not what solo I play on trumpet, that's up to me. In terms of what's being communicated. And so I think that's it. Doing things that way takes a longer time, I think, to gain some major traction. But ultimately, there's no point in us doing this if this isn't 110% authentic and 110% exactly what James wants it to be. Because we see the power of communicating in a way that makes it relatable. And so it's a longer journey there, and so it's kind of a roundabout way of saying, I mean, you asked me what I've learned. I'll kind of answer that. I'll frame it in terms of like what I hope to accomplish in terms of on the civilian side, is that we can present this in its most authentic form to people of all different walks of life and engage in conversation. Ultimately, if you can connect with someone on a human level, then that's a starting point for a deep relationship, and you start to listen with open ears. I know the first time I met James, I was going out, we met at a bar near John Carroll. I always say, sorry, I just got to say the line, sorry. Because I said it on the NPR interview, it was followed by 10 seconds of silence. But I said, we met at a bar, had some drinks, and then he brought me back to his place and showed me his guns. So that's what happened, but leading up to this conversation, I was a nervous wreck. I said, well, what should I and shouldn't I say? I said, how am I going to act around him? It was like, and I'm sure you probably felt it was like really awkward until I got,
Yeah, you're much less awkward.
Yeah, thank you. And so when we connected on that level, there's just so much you can understand in relationship building. And the other thing I'll mention about just projects which integrate the arts and social causes, that so many times they kind of wonderful projects end up being presented to people who already get it, who don't really need to hear it. So these, especially, we do a lot of projects around social justice, which I'm very passionate about. And I'm always thinking about how to frame it in a way that we can get people in the room that actually need to hear it. Because there's great projects that inspire the base, and there's great projects that enlighten. And so how can we create a project that's a hybrid of those two components? Because that is the way to really affect change in a major way beyond, I always joke with a lot of artists, we kind of get these projects in our head and they become like, let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya and the world will be cool. But, and I appreciate the artistic value of a lot of these projects, but our goal is really twofold in terms of energizing the base and also enlightening those who actually need to hear this. So I think if we maintain the authenticity of what we're doing, it may take 1 year, 10 years, 15 years, it doesn't matter. We're going to be 110% real about the presentation of it. So.
Who else has questions?
So I've heard you talk a lot about doing it with veterans and mental health groups and stuff like that. And I came out of a military family, and I still have people in the military, and we do like, they do like the Yellow Ribbon Project, where they're supporting, do you do people that are currently in the military, do you do the show for them?
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of the, we'll go anywhere, anywhere we're invited. Last spring, I was invited to go back to Afghanistan and talk to the troops. So that was the first time I was kind of put in a room with hundreds of active duty troops, trying to talk to them about experiences I had after leaving their position. And I think that it still went surprisingly well. We do have military supporters, and yeah, I mean, we'd love to. We have a show coming up in DC, and we'll have some USO representation there, and so those are conversations that we're having. But yeah, I mean, essentially, we'd like to go anywhere.
How did you bring this together with the different groups that you're talking about? It's very powerful, but there are different groups out there. We're talking about different ways to present it. You don't want to water down this message, but how do you get more people to hear what needs to be said, especially in this day and age?
Yeah, so the show, generally the message of the show stays the same. We don't really edit that. I try not to use the F word when I'm in high schools. I think that's the only editing we've done.
It's not the same effect when he says darn.
Yeah, I slipped up once, it was okay. But yeah, so I mean, it's more making it scalable. We do have video content online that we push to people. But we have 15-minute version all the way up to a 95-minute version, incorporating, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Leon Bibb, news anchor here in Cleveland. So he's been part of our show before, and we've actually I've handed the microphone off to him on stage. So when we worked with him at Playhouse Square, he stepped in at 3 points to share his story. I know one of the things that sticks with me, and I think it's the third time I'm bringing it up now, but the seeing your parents cry when you leave. So I talked about leaving and that interaction with my dad and stepped off, and then he talked about when he got his draft notice and his mom making breakfast and crying. And so, something like that does help us reach the Vietnam vet community a little bit. And to your point earlier, I guess I didn't think about it, that he was drafted also. So he did kind of provide that touch point for us. And yeah, outside of that, it's just kind of making sure that we have some type of configuration in which we can get in any space, more so than editing the message.
Yeah, and just briefly expand on that. In terms of heightened visibility, I think the right approach here is to find the right supporters, financial supporters, to be able to be sponsors of our tour that we do, right? So we've done about 65 performances around the country. So if we have a major sponsor that is wholeheartedly embraces this, and that'll enable us to really book all kinds of venues that we want to book, and and figure out how to kind of make it sustainable there. Because ultimately, what we find, especially in performing arts centers, I said, joke to James, I've never had such a difficult time to get a gig in the theater until I started doing this project. And it's an interesting divide in the arts community, and it's a tough project to sell. It's a tough project to sell 1,000 tickets to. We're doing a show at a 2,000-seat theater in Omaha next Friday, so I hope I didn't just jinx myself. The ticket sales are going well. But in general, it's because it's not really in the mainstream, and it's kind of hard to describe. So having outside sponsors really who believe in this and who can help to kind of move this around the country is something that's worked so far, and now we want to kind of take it to the next level, but that's really a key component. And then the other part is we have a program called the Modern Warrior Experience, where we bring in veterans from local communities into this format of storytelling, and we workshop the story that they want to present themselves with our artists, and we do a private concert for whoever that they want to invite. And then we have a film of it that we have them keep, and they can keep it private or share it publicly. And so that's something that's kind of an extension of the therapeutic process, is kind of embedded in the actual show.
One more question.
I just have a comment.
telling your story. Thank you for making it come alive, because I really, really had a very emotional experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Dominic and James and the entire Modern Warrior Live team. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll hit the home stretch for today.